Hello, and you're very welcome to the Music As podcast series. I'm Louise O'Connor, a fiddle player from Clare, and this is a series where I chat to different people about the role music plays in their lives, joining the dots between music and lots of other areas. The next few episodes will have a focus on County Clare with thanks to support from Creative Ireland Clare and Clare County Council. You can follow the series at Music As Podcast on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and now on YouTube. And please subscribe and share the podcast if you enjoy it. I am delighted to welcome my fifth guest, Josie Nugent from East Clare, who's now based in Derry. Josie Nugent is a woman who lives and breathes inclusivity in her musical life. She's passionate about helping people to improve their lives with the power of music, from those with learning difficulties, dementia, autism, and in cross-community work in the north. I found it very inspiring to hear about the powerful work she does with her music therapy training in these areas. And Josie's incredibly humble about all she's achieved. We also chat about her thriving personal practice as a fiddle player and composer, and her interest in modal structures in Irish music and the compositions of Hungarian composer Béla Bartók. As Siobhan Long said about Josie's solo album Modal Citizen, it strikes at the elemental heart of the music of East Clare, a belly-deep sigh that seems to be rooted in centuries past, yet somehow manages to inhabit the contemporary world with vim. Limo Mwainley described the tone of Josie's playing as elemental and striking. Collaborative albums with Brian Stafford and Mary Nugent at josiebrinemusic.info. I'll open the interview now with a clip of one of Josie's compositions from her album Modal Citizen, a slip jig called A Cambridge Cycle. Hi Josie, how are you doing? Thank you so much for talking to me today. How are you doing up there in Derry?
We're doing great. Things have quieted down, thankfully, again. I think with the COVID-19 restrictions reduced, people are out and about more. Back at work since March. So doing
Brilliant.
Live sessions with the children, young children and teenagers and stuff. So it's, we're just getting on as good as we can. So it's great that we can actually go for a cup of coffee and things like that again.
It's fantastic, isn't it?
Yeah.
New life altogether. So Josie, you are like myself from Clare, but you've gone on a bit of a journey, haven't you, with the music? You said that you trained initially in virology, which is very interesting and relevant to this moment in time. Could you tell me a little bit about how you went from training in virology and going from that to working as a music therapist as you do at the moment?
So I was a virologist before I became a music therapist. Very tough again at this point in time because I'd be involved in developing diagnostic tests and looking at the mutants and viruses and all that. So the whole pandemic has been very interesting for me. But while I was doing that, we'd come really to the end of a big research project. I was working with people worldwide really on it. And I was an equine virology project. And we all kind of moved off in different directions. And I had this kind of inner need to help people and not to be, I was in charge of the research group at that stage of work, but I wasn't really finding it fulfilling in that it was very much sitting at my desk, writing grants and that kind of thing. And I really wanted to be back in the lab doing practical work. Or more than that, I actually wanted to be helping people in a very kind of holistic way. And I was living in Cambridge, and there was a music therapy course being run there. And a friend of mine had qualified as a music therapist there. So I saw him in practice. And I said, yeah, that's it. Doing music therapy, that's what I want to do. So I applied just to the Cambridge course, got in, and I qualified as a music therapist in 2010, and it was the best decision I ever made, I have to say.
Brilliant. Yeah. So you grew up playing traditional music, Josie, didn't you?
I did, yeah. I grew up in the heart of it. I had Jack Mulcair lived down the road, literally from us. He used to call into our house, we used to call into their house. He was a great kind of mentor really, as a young child growing up, young teenager. He brought us, taught Mary, me, my sister Mary, and myself about the collections. We played with Francie and Brian Donlan, again, another big part of our music growing up. And that was, they, gave us a great social aspect in going to Kilmurray McMahon to the Friday night Katie's there. As well as that, I learned from Tony and Nan, but that was just a lesson. I never played with Tony. That was this official kind of lesson. And but my, I suppose, love for it came from the people I met, such as Jack Mulcair, Brian Francie Donnan, big time, and Marnie Scully was another one. She was a friend of the family. She lived in Galway. She was a singer, an Irish traditional singer. And Dad was very good at bringing us to visit people like Peadar Loughlin and Paddy Murphy. We'd go to had these house sessions. I didn't realize at the time how important all this was. That was the thing. So we got to get it from the grassroots level, really, thanks to my dad, just being social and bringing us about and meeting and respecting the elders, as children, as young people growing up, and realizing they had a lot to give us and to offer,
Yeah, that's lovely. And I know, like, from your work now, that you have done a lot of research and practice in older people, and particularly in older people with dementia living abroad. So it's all that, it's kind of bringing that like social aspect, and that it's an oral culture. Like, so it was lovely to hear those stories of how you've been able to bring that to people in the UK, especially, whose memories could be failing in almost every other way, but they still have the memory of the music and that kind of social aspects. Could you tell me a little bit about your work in dementia and how that came about?
Yeah, my work with dementia started in Northern Ireland, actually. I tried really hard to get work in it. It was always very difficult, to be honest, because you had a lot of competition between community music projects and music therapy, and they seem to value community music projects over music therapy. But saying that, I worked, I was lucky to get snippets, bits of work. When I was here in Derry initially, in an assessment unit and in a long-term care unit. Then when I was working in Belfast for a while, I did a lot of work, cross-community work that was, much more present at that stage, because I was working in areas that were either staunchly Catholic or Protestant, whatever, or very mixed. And then I had this wonderful, thanks to Coltis, actually, Coltis in Britain, that I had this opportunity then to work in different centres across Britain. If I come back to the Northern Ireland one first, because when I was in Northern Ireland, I developed kind of a tool for working with people with dementia. I needed to be able to assess this thing. And we looked at how they enjoy it. Your measurement, you've discovered ways of measuring how their enjoyment, their levels of participation. And I presented that actually at a conference in Dublin, going back a few years now. So it was just a poster presentation. I didn't make it. I didn't make it any further than that. That's life. So, but when I went to England, then it was fascinating, actually. It was lovely to go to England, because the difference between working in Northern Ireland and England was quite huge. In Northern Ireland, to be very careful about the type of song I used, type of dance tune. I had people from marching band tradition. I had people from, the Catholic side, from going to, the football, hurling, all that kind of stuff. You're very careful about the song you would use, that it had no political connections. You would spend time getting to know the repertoire the clients in the North knew. And in Belfast, that was fascinating, these singer-songwriters I'd never heard of in my life. I had to do a lot of country western stuff as well. So that seems to be a big thing in the North. And then the dance music equally, you had to be quite careful in the songs you use, but there's a lot of songs in common, but it was restrictive for me, especially being a fiddle player, and fiddle being my first instrument, and I would never use a bar run or tin whistle in sessions. I would use my fiddle, obviously, because it's my first instrument and it's a universal instrument. So when I went to England, I could speak Irish again. It's great. Wow. I was like, I could actually use the Irish songs, that people grew up with. I didn't have to be worried about repertoire. that was huge. I could just be free. And there were probably mixed groups here in England, but you just weren't, you didn't feel it in the atmosphere. When I was in Birmingham, in Liverpool, down in London, London was quite a beautiful setting. It was very cosmopolitan, actually. There's a lot of different cultures in the group I worked with in London. That was with Eilish Byrne. And she was a great fiddle. You probably know Eilish, great fiddle player. So that was, a really kind of treasured session for me to do, to be honest. And the other one then was Manchester as well. And that would have been mixed, really, but it was more open.
Yeah.
And what I did was I took the tools that I had developed in the North, and I kind of, that structure of kind of awakening the people, giving them a gradual awakening, then bringing in familiar songs, and then helping them to become more participatory in the session, and then ending with something that's very, brings everyone together. Like I have these sensory circular bands that I actually gave, they're a woman in England makes them, and they're absolutely stunning. I have them downstairs actually. And this brings everyone together no matter what, because they can hold on to it and we can all dance and play together. So I use that concept, and I have made that available as a download. It's available on the Cultus for Britain website, and people can take ideas from it, because to be honest, when somebody has dementia or post-stroke, they need every possible level of stimulation they can be given. And to be, it's not, I've hopefully it's helping. That's all I can say. I spent a lot of time working in that area, and I want to just pass it on. That was my own simple goal on that,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it can be quite simple, can't it? Like, it doesn't require very advanced abilities or musical abilities or anything. Like, it's a very accessible tool for working with people with dementia, isn't it? Yeah.
It is. People, they want to recall songs they knew. You just start them off, and they'll come in with you, and you can spur them on, and you can, initially gradually awaken them by maybe doing a few exercise things, getting a few action style songs just to enliven the body, and just enlivening the body gently, then the mind becomes a bit more alert, and then you can start introducing things like Molly Malone, She's Coming Round the Mountain, the really well-known stuff, Dublin's Fair City, all these, and then you can move into their own areas and kind of see, okay, what can they recall from their own past? So it's fascinating.
It is, yeah.
I've lots of stories from it,
Yeah, I've ran those kind of groups before for older adults, singing groups, and you could have someone who wouldn't speak from one end of the week to the next, but in that singing group, they would know every single word of the songs, and it would all come back to them. Like, it was really amazing. Yeah.
I had one guy in I think it was Birmingham, and he never, as I said, he never would speak, and then I started off singing O Rosh Tzvahawalya, and he just joined in. That led to another hour, so it led to one to the next, and he livened up. It was beautiful, and it says you obviously have experienced it as well,
Yeah, it was really a highlight, I think, like a highlight of the week for so many people who were like kind of unreachable almost, like, in communication terms anyway.
Yeah. And then we'll say, going in by contrast, in the North, I had this drummer from the marching band tradition. He was a fantastic guy, I used to get him. He used to be my kind of second in command here. You're going to help me out, do the drumming, or keep the tempo for this thing, And it really, it just enriched his life. He had a role again to play in life.
Yeah,
he loved it. He came in, he knew he had a job to do when he came into session, and he just brightened up, and he was fantastic rhythm. My God, it was great.
Yeah, I find it fascinating anyway how sometimes like music can be the only thing that kind of works, or that kind of restores an identity for people as well, doesn't it? Yeah,
absolutely. A lot of that at the moment, actually. It's just coming out of post-COVID. People are beginning to come out, little young children struggling. They've been in lockdown for best part of a year or whatever, and it's surreal for them, you know. So it's a lot of sensory music centered stuff. So I'm going off into this new area because these young children need it. You know, it's just as I'm at the moment is okay, I've got to go and think musical sensory kind of a road, which is fascinating actually. It's kind of, oh my God, you know, and I've had, you know, two young lads yesterday and another one today, you know, and it's okay, right, this is what they need. It's not sitting down just improvising. They need a lot of sensory input as well. You know, so
you could forget that, like that children are just affected in a totally different way, you know. They're inherently social beings typically, aren't they? You know, they would learn, that's how they learn, you know, children and young people.
And they've all been isolated from each other for the last year. We've done Zoom sessions which they don't see, they don't touch, nobody can touch each other at the minute yet, but they haven't socially interacted, you know, which is so, you know, you can say it's so damaging. We don't realize, you know, the difficulties that's going to be, how difficult that's going to be for some of these children, because they have lost their friends, they've lost that, you know, the skill, they've lost it, they're a year behind plus in being able to socially interact and develop those social interactive skills. No, it's I'm discovering this now, you know. I wouldn't have been able to say this a few months ago. But you know, it's there is an issue there. There is something to be dealt with there.
That kind of tactile way of learning, you know, children are so creative and tactile in the way that they learn as well.
Absolutely. You know, they learn from each other and they need to see each other. You know, we've one girl at work, Eve's her name, and she's 22. She'll be 22 quite soon. She's big into her Makaton, which is Makaton uses signs with language. And I have her on Zoom. I can only have her on Zoom sessions. But she is such a big mentor to 4 little children. You know, and it's the only way we can do it at the moment is via Zoom, you know, but at least she's inspiring 4 children big time. Her presence, you know, much better than I can, because I'm much younger, you know. She's they'll do it for Eve. And they keep going Eve because that's your vowels, and to keep pointing. It's lovely, so beautiful.
That's amazing. And I suppose in your area of autism as well, like huge area of interest of mine also, like that, not being able to have those in-person groups as well is kind of devastating, isn't it? Like, well,
I have a good case study through lockdown in autism for a young little boy with autism. Is what we did actually was he didn't receive music therapy while we were in serious lockdown, because he didn't work with the screen, so Zoom sessions wouldn't have worked. And then we returned to live sessions back in September. He came back and we made the break actually worked, just taking the break from it. Sometimes, you know, I sent during the break period, I would have sent things to the house that he might be happy to interact with his mom, for example, water flutes. You might like them. He loves water, and you can get water flutes. You can fill them with water. And took him, you know, Mom said it took him, should know, you know, a few kind of days or a week to decide he's going to do something with them, but he did, you know. And I sent social stories. That was another biggie during the lockdown, is you created social stories about what we did do when he was there, and that helped a lot, because he used to love flicking the pages and reading the story. So these were tools that actually just kept him aware of, I suppose, what used to go on during music therapy. Came back then, and this is a young lad that would not really participate, didn't have a wish to participate actively in sessions as such. He really struggled with that. Came back in September, and within a few weeks we were improvising. He was playing guitar. I was like, the break, it was just he was so ready to connect with me in a new way. And I have these beautiful recordings of him, you know, tickling the guitar, like just playing little bits, and I responding back to him, we having a conversation. And Mum was so chuffed with it. And since that, we've gone on to, he comes in now and he plays a bit the ukulele, and the keyboard, and we have joint conversations. It's just developed wonderfully. Again, when we lock down, there's no sessions, but when we come back, then I give social story that describes the session. That helps at home, and then Mummy takes that on board with family members, and it's been a fascinating little story, you know, with him. He's kind of, you know, we've developed this very, very strong bond.
Yeah.
You know, so it's been devastating for people with autism during lockdown. There's a lot of people who didn't have any input, you know, or some kids, you know, in whatever way. And I mean, it's been on the news, it's been on everywhere. So it has been absolutely devastating for them. You know, there's been regression big time in their social skills and in their ability to cope, you know.
Yeah, it's interesting how, like, I've run groups as well with individuals with autism, and it's people in inverted commas wouldn't typically want to be part of groups.
Yeah.
But I found when there's music involved, like, that's the only time that there was any kind of cohesion. Like, we run lots of different groups, but it was just amazing to see the bond that kind of developed amongst the group. It was dance, but it was a lot to do with music and a lot to do with people. You pick the song that you know the person will connect to. So it was, you know, from autism is so incredibly diverse, but I've always found that the main thread that I can see, or that I've been able to develop or work with, is like for people to share their musical taste, maybe, or to be part of some movement group that involves the music as well. So the
beauty of it, you know, as you're talking there, is the non-verbal.
Yeah,
that's the biggie bit of it in terms of, for people with autism especially, they don't have to verbalize. We learned this from the sessions in County Clare, you know, Switzer. You know, you just sit there and you play. And with music, you sit there, you connect through the music. And that's opens a big door for people with autism who there's an alternative way in. Art therapy gives that also. And I have I've just mentioned one little boy there, but I also worked with an adult during lockdown again. Didn't see this particular adult during the lockdown, but then we had sessions after, and again it was very fruitful. So it's so important. Yeah, as you're saying, this non-verbal communication is like through music is, you know, can we promote it more? You know?
Yeah.
How, most especially now coming out of lockdown, you know, it's so to help mental wellness and mental well-being, you know. Yeah,
absolutely. I suppose with the non-verbal, it's taking the pressure off someone, isn't it? Like when you're non-verbal, because that's not your way of speaking, is not your way of operating in the world, like, you know, whereas I find like for some it's like music becomes their way of operating in the world, to be constantly to be listening to music in their headphones all day long, every day. It's like their way that they kind of maintain their equilibrium as well, like I find.
Non-verbal and gestural, I mean, a lot can be said through facial gestures, through body gestures, and that, you know, especially the young children who, you know, would struggle to speak. Some of them, you know, would struggle with vocalizing anyway. So it's huge. It's huge and so important just now. I mean, as I said, in some of the young children I'm working with, they have a need. They've all this energy built up inside them, you know, and it's so it's just, you know, I'm going off in a new direction here, trying to help them out. Okay, right. Well, you guys are opening new doors for me here as a music therapist, you know. This is what's happening. It's absolutely every day is a new day here, you know.
Yeah. And talking about like music as self-expression, you have your own very rich musical practice yourself. Josie, could you tell me a bit about that and how you balance that with your therapy work as well?
I trained in Cambridge in England as a music therapist, and I was very fortunate to train under Amelia Oldfield, or Professor Amelia Oldfield, who's now retired, but she was a clarinet player. And she always stressed the importance of keeping your own music on the go, as well as being a music therapist. And I just thought, well, this totally makes sense to me. You know, you don't, while you change your approach to how you play your instrument to be a therapist, you know, you can improvise on 1 note, 2 notes, 3 notes, and all that. And but she and I kept that because I needed to keep my own musical voice as well as using my instruments in music therapy. And I am using my first instrument both as a therapist and, you know, for myself. But I think that was one thing. The other thing for me, music was always a language from a very young age. I kind of, you know, for me, it was just a language of expression. So that has always stayed with me. And I always, for instance, when I moved back to Northern Ireland and to work, because I chose to come back to Ireland to work and there were jobs going in the north, I really struggled with identity because I'm Catholic, you know, I mean, you've opened me gob and that's it. Sorry, it's like, open your mouth. Okay, she's a Southern take, you know, she can't be on that kind of thing. Right, so you've got this kind of, what identity have I? Am I kind of, do I adopt an identity as a music therapist or just try to be myself? Or, you know, I was like, what am I going to do here? This is scary. I'm going into staunch Protestant areas to work and, you know, what identity am I supposed to have? So it took me quite some time to figure it out, to be honest. And I improvised a lot. That's when I used composition. You know, music is a tool of expression for me. And I decided, no, I just got to be myself. Just get out there. You know, I don't need to adopt another identity. I don't need to just stop worrying about what other people might perceived identity, what other people might think, and just be yourself. And by being myself, I like to sit and tootle on the piano and compose, or on the key, with the different fiddles, types of fiddles I have. I just like doing it. You know, so it's if nobody probably buy much of it, but don't care. You know, I enjoy doing it, and I'll put a few more recordings hopefully out there over time. You know, let's do it for myself rather than doing it as a commercial kind of thing. Really, you know, to be honest.
And you had in your Modal Citizen album as well, you had a mix of the traditional but your own compositions, and you said how you are influenced by the old Irish modal way of playing. Could you tell me a little bit about that influence and how that came together?
I learned music as a child. My mum was a primary school teacher, but she did everything in solfa, and she would have taught us lots of songs at home. So my sister and I we translated oral stuff into solfa from as soon as, I suppose, we were able to, subconsciously, because that's how Mam did it. You'd hear her just working it out in solfa. That was it. Then when we went to study piano, and my sister studied in Hungary in the Kodály Institute, and that, you know, the whole music of Bartók, I became very interested in that. And he uses solfege. And I mean, this was kind of a gold mine for me. My sister's in Hungary, she can get access to all this stuff, you know, and I have all the Bartók. I have a load of Bartók music. Some of my favorite music is written by Bartók. But, you know, he recognized, you know, all the modes have colors and characters, you know, and I just found that fascinating. And I also use it in my music therapy practice as well. I think in modes. I don't think really. I sort of think in major, minor, but I'm probably a nightmare to work with in that sense. I sort of hear things modally, hear them in solfege, rather than working out the gymnastics of major, minor keys and that kind of thing. When I'm accompanying and I'm sort of thinking more modally, you know. And it's akin to our music. The Irish music is modal, it is, you know, predominantly back in the day, if you look at the structures of it. But it would have also been influenced, you know, by other genres as well, because we had a lot of classical input through the harp tradition. You know, we had classical, you know, musicians in Ireland going way back in time. You know, like there were the patrons in the big houses and that, you know, so they would have been trained, you know, quite in more, let's say, classical modes of working. So they're just different scale systems. I mean, there's lots, you know, each country has its own There's lots of different scale systems in different continents. So I mean, I think it's all fascinating, you know. Really.
It is so fascinating, and the fact that the modal system, you know, we think of Irish traditional music as being traditional to Ireland, but actually this modal system is quite a universal idea. And as you say, you know, the Eastern European, the Hungarian folk music, that all had its modal systems as well.
Yeah, if you look at Bartók's Microcosmos, you know, the kind of study tool for piano, you know, it's all totally built on the modal system. You know, it's beautiful. Yeah. It's such an easy thing for it kind of totally makes sense to me. Probably makes sense to nobody, you know, probably wouldn't particularly to others, but I can, it's, you know, this is great.
Yeah. It's so interesting. Yeah. That's able to sustain you, I'm sure, like that in your work, that you're still able to retain that passion for music and, you know, constant learning as well.
Well, you never, I remember it was Paul Brady said it in an interview years ago, you know, as a musician, if you're not constantly moving on, I can't remember where he put it, but I thought, that's great. You know, music is something for life. You're constantly growing as a musician. You know, that was the both what he said. I thought, I like this. This is good. You're not going to be stuck in a job. You're constantly developing, constantly growing, you know. And I thought, I totally agree with this. It was great to hear that when I was quite young, in my teenage years.
Yeah. And you're in the north as well. Like, it's interesting to hear about how the music there, how different your experiences were in the north versus going to the UK, and it just speaks to the complexity of Northern Ireland. And I feel like that's something down in the Republic that we often don't have a huge experience of or awareness of, the issue of identity in the north. And you mentioned there, like, your cross community work. Would you mind speaking a little bit about that and that kind of work?
I've spoken a bit about my own identity, I think, which was quite, you know, it took me, especially when I was living in Belfast, became more of an issue. For some reason, when I'm here in Derry, it's less, it appears to be less of an issue, even though we have staunch, you know, Republican and loyalist areas. In terms of my cross-community work, I have, thanks to my work with the Cultural Nicanine here in Derry, I would have done a lot for 2013, because I was living in Derry at the time. That was when they were the City of Culture. So we did a lot of cross-community workshops in the area. So I would have mixed with Mark Wilson, great, fantastic world-class drummer, amongst others, and he ended up being a model citizen as well, you know, because I got him in. I was like, wow, it was great. So we did these workshops together. We had Seamus O'Kane on Baron and Mark then on the fantastic drummer, you know, and they know each other very well. You see, musicians know each other quite well. So we did these kind of, you know, we'll say cross-community workshops, and I continue to do cross-community work for the Imbolc Festival every year. We have children from special needs schools in the area, but they would always be from mixed backgrounds. So therefore, the music I would do for that would be massively different. It's pentatonic, so I'm going back to the modes. And you go back to Gary Hastings' book. If you're looking for tunes from the marching band tradition, Gary Hastings wrote an amazing collective on fife tunes. And this brings me to Jordy McAdam as well, sadly, who died, he just died this year. It was a dear friend who made my straw fiddle that I've got here. And he was both a fifer and a fantastic fiddle player as well. And what I'm saying is, when you're working in cross-community groups in the north, you create these I've created sort of alternative style tunes that would have elements from the fife tradition and sort of elements from our own. There'd be tunes with not that many notes, and we'd evolved unique ways, I suppose, of creating the workshop. You divide the group, say, for example, into a group of 20 into maybe 3 groups, and they share parts of the piece or something. I do this work actually with Amanda Kozer Gillespie, who is the main person in charge of the music curriculum for Musicians Without Borders. So it's and that's a very well-known worldwide organisation. She lives here in Derry, so we do quite a bit of collaborative work together when it comes to this kind of cross-community work. So that's probably under the carpet, really. You don't really hear much about that one. So you just kind of, we've been doing this every year since 2013, you know?
Yeah.
The two of us, we, you know, very good friends. And it's great because she's coming from a community music background with all the Musicians Without Borders experience, which is massive. And I'm coming from this Irish music tradition, but being very sensitive to both the marching band, you know, music culture and the trad music culture as well.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
So there is transgenerational trauma. It's very much present, we'll say, in the people who are left in these kind of, as I call, working class areas, because the money, things haven't changed that much over the years, sadly. You know, there's a lot of money sort of pumped in, but just living standards are still quite low. You know, they're quite severe for for people in these areas. So you know, there's still an entrenchment in terms of thought process.
Yeah.
And we saw that only a month or two ago, you know, when the hits, you know, we had trouble in the streets both in Belfast and here in Derry, you know. I was sad to see that again, because it kind of put, well, is it safe to go to work now? You know, so I wasn't sure for a week or two. It's a bit kind of, you know, you have to be very careful.
Yeah.
It's kind of quieting down now again until probably the 12th. It'll probably escalate again, you know. And you have to get out, you know, that's it. You just get away. Because it's just, everyone has a right to protest, they have a right to be true to what's right, what they feel is right for them. But just when it hits the streets and people start causing damage and hurting, you know, and people get injured, it's sad. There's no need for it. You know?
Yeah. It's, I suppose, what you mentioned there, like the transgenerational trauma, like that's something that's very deep rooted, like, isn't it? And it's something that, you know, is affecting generation after generation who mightn't have been involved directly in the conflict, but I was reading about some of the long-term effects of it, but also like the more acute post-traumatic stress disorders experience as well, and how various types of therapy, including music, are used in a clinical way. But it's difficult, you know, when there isn't a feeling of safety, or if it is still a period of unrest. It's very difficult to make progress with those type of therapies, isn't it?
It is. We have, in terms of music therapy for people with post-traumatic stress from the Troubles, there's very few therapists officially practicing in that area. We've one very senior music therapist in Belfast, but she's now become a psychotherapist, so she's using her psychotherapy skills there in that area as well. That one is, there is an issue there, and there'll be a lot of people that, you know, would like to receive help, but I'm not sure that they are receiving it. And then we have, as we saw on the streets recently, you have the younger generation being kind of manipulated into, you know, carrying kind of entrenched mindsets on, which is sad, very, very sad to see that, despite the fantastic work that's going on with youth workers in all these areas. I worked when I was in Belfast, I worked in one of those staunch crossfire areas on a project, but I have to say the youth workers and working with these young teenagers in these areas are absolutely brilliant. And they are the gateway in, really, they can understand, you know, what these young teenagers need, and try and guide them a little bit, not to get themselves caught up in the politics of it, and, you know, and entrench themselves in kind of very single-minded ways of thinking, you know. So the youth workers are, you know, they're the immediate gateway in. But we do need therapies. We do, especially now with COVID-19, is Brexit and two things together, you know, my God. And things become political here for the wrong reasons, you know. You know, for emotional and mental wellness, therapeutic input is massively needed.
Yeah. It was really uplifting seeing your videos. I think it was on BBC News, was it? Your videos of the work you were doing through lockdown over Zoom teaching music, and you had a young man with Down syndrome, wasn't it?
Yeah,
Who
Jack
was,
playing piano. Yeah.
So
That was a big one for him, actually, because he's a big country western fan. So I had to do all Derek Ryan songs. And say, as long as you do a country western song, we're home. I was doing one with him today, and he was doing, he's done A Mother's Son. That was the one you probably heard, which is so, like, my God, so endearing.
Yeah.
During lockdown, and now he's doing God's Plan. It's like, again, he picks these very, very, important songs.
Yeah.
That Derek Ryan has written, or some he's written, not, and he loves that lilt or that rhythm that's in country western music. But it was his life, as Mum says, sort of lifesaver during lockdown. Really, he just devoted himself to piano right through it, and we managed to meet a few times during August when the lockdown was reduced, and I managed to play in his backyard or front of the house or whatever. And so we've only had 6 live lessons since lockdown started for that young lad. But I had him today, and I can tell you, he was totally he can do it through Zoom. It's fine as long as he's doing it. Yeah, that's brilliant. It's fantastic that you were able to find a way, like to keep it going. It brings me actually sorry for butting in there, but it brings me to something that's, I think, quite important. Is I've children with a learning difficulty, they should be encouraged to learn their instrument as well. This is jumping a bit outside the music therapy thing. And while we have a flute player from Dublin, she won an award, TGCAR award, flute player, and she used to teach in a school for the deaf in Dublin. And she was fantastic at teaching people with learning difficulty. I'm quite kind of convicted in myself to try and find ways forward for young children with a learning difficulty to learn an instrument. Keyboard seems to be quite an accessible one for these kind of teenagers. And that's something I would like to develop and give these young children or young teenagers opportunities to take it somewhere, have a social life with it, and perform it. Not just as once-offs, occasionally, but to actually perform with others, And it can be, I'm kind of convinced personally, if you take quite creative approaches, which is what I'm doing, is I'm doing coloured keys with that young lad you were talking about, you mentioned. And taking creative approaches towards the teaching, I think, can ensure it happening. Yeah. It's another one of my, little goals in life. Causes. Causes. That's a nice way to put that. That's cool. I like that. That's brilliant, Josie. Well, Josie, it's been so fascinating to hear all about your wonderful work up in Derry and beyond. It's been a great tool for you, the music therapy, hasn't it? Absolutely. No, I mean, as I say, I made the right decision when I chose to just move into music therapy. Much happier. I feel I'm doing what I want to do is help people to self-express and find where they can be, and nurture all the goodness that's within them, that kind of thing. You could do that through music, as you said yourself. The non-verbal tool of communication just allows a child to open up in new ways that they otherwise wouldn't. Yeah. Brilliant. Very inspiring altogether. You're welcome. Someday we might have a tune. Yes, we'll meet for a tune for sure sometime. Brilliant. Thank you so much, Josie. It's been a pleasure. You're welcome. Talk to you. Nice to meet a new person, yeah? Yes, exactly. Thank you for listening to the Music As podcast. I hope you enjoyed today's interview. You can follow the podcast at Music As Podcast on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and now on YouTube also. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and share the podcast if you enjoy it. See you next time.